Let's explore the different categories of hormones and how they interact with our bodies, especially in response to exercise and muscle growth. Hormones come in three main categories based on their molecular structure: steroid hormones, polypeptide or peptide hormones, and amine hormones. These categories are essential because they determine how each hormone interacts with muscle cells and influences adaptations to exercise. Each category works in its unique way, influencing the processes that support muscle development, strength, and overall physiological responses to physical activity. Let's first look at steroid hormones. These include hormones like cortisol, produced by the adrenal cortex, and testosterone, produced by the gonads. Steroid hormones are fat-soluble, meaning they can easily diffuse across the cell membrane. Once inside the cell, steroid hormone binds to a specific receptor, forming what's called a hormone receptor complex. This complex then undergoes a conformational shift, essentially a change in its shape, and becomes activated. It moves into the cell nucleus where our DNA is stored. Here, it acts like a key that unlocks specific sections of the DNA, triggering the production of messenger RNA, mRNA. This mRNA is like an instruction manual that tells the cell to make specific proteins that help with muscle growth, repair, or other cellular functions. For example, testosterone binds to its receptor in muscle cells and signals the production of proteins that contribute to muscle hypertrophy. However, creating mRNA is only the first part of the process. The mRNA must then be translated into proteins by the ribosomes in the cell. So this step leads to the production of essential proteins like actin and myosin, which are the building blocks of muscle fibers. While steroid hormones have a powerful influence, the creation of proteins requires several stages of cellular activity before the final outcome is achieved. Next, we have polypeptide hormones, which are made up of chains of amino acids. Examples include growth hormone and insulin. Unlike steroid hormones, polypeptide hormones cannot cross the cell membrane because they are not fat soluble. Instead, they bind to receptors on the surface of the cell. This binding triggers a series of events inside the cell, starting with the activation of secondary messengers. These messengers carry the hormone's signal deeper into the cell, causing a cascade of signaling events. This might affect processes like DNA transcription or mRNA translation, which are critical for protein synthesis and metabolic regulation. For example, when insulin binds to its receptor, it triggers a process that brings glucose transporters to the cell's surface, allowing glucose to enter the cell and provide energy. This whole chain of events supports cellular functions like growth and recovery, especially after exercise. Finally, there are amine hormones, which are derived from amino acids like tyrosine and tryptophan. Examples of amine hormones include epinephrine, norepinephrine, and dopamine. Like polypeptide hormones, they bind to receptors on the cell membrane and act through secondary messengers to carry out their effects. However, one key difference is that amine hormones are not directly regulated by the same feedback systems that control polypeptide hormones. Even though they operate differently, amine hormones are still vital players in how the body responds to exercise and stress. Now, let's look into how heavy resistance exercise interacts with these hormonal systems to promote muscle growth and strength. When we perform resistance exercises, such as lifting weights, our bodies produce an adaptive response. This response includes increased secretion of anabolic hormones, hormones that promote tissue building, like testosterone and growth hormone. These hormonal changes help to trigger muscle adaptations such as increased muscle size and strength. They also play a role in recovery after a workout. When you lift heavy weights, the stress signals from your muscles travel through your nervous system and stimulate various endocrine glands, prompting them to release hormones into the bloodstream. These hormones circulate throughout the body and interact with specific receptors in muscle cells. The exercise stress stimulates the muscle cells to become more sensitive to these anabolic hormones. For example, after just your tumrus resistance training sessions, your muscle cells may increase the number of androgen receptors, the receptors for testosterone, making the muscles more responsive to future training. The endocrine system is highly sensitive to the specific demands of the exercise being performed. Different types of resistance exercise protocols can influence the type and amount of hormonal response. For instance, heavy weights with fewer repetitions tend to activate higher levels of anabolic hormones than lighter weights with more repetitions. The activation of high threshold motor units in large muscle groups, such as during a squat or deadlift, triggers a stronger hormonal response compared to exercises involving smaller muscle groups. During and after resistance training, hormones are released to help repair muscle damage, rebuild tissues, and promote muscle hypertrophy. However, there is a delicate balance. If the exercise stress is too intense or the recovery period too short, the body can shift toward a catabolic state where more muscle tissue is broken down than built up. This happens when anabolic hormones like testosterone are not able to bind to their receptors effectively, or if the receptors themselves become less sensitive, known as receptor downregulation. Hormonal responses to exercise are influenced by several factors, including the amount of muscle tissue activated, the intensity of the exercise, and the level of muscle damage and repair required. After a heavy workout, hormones help remodel the muscle tissue, promoting growth and repair. This hormonal environment is shaped by the type of resistance training performed, making the design of exercise programs critical to maximizing muscle adaptations. Finally, while blood tests can give us a snapshot of hormone levels during and after exercise, it's important to understand that these hormone levels are only one piece of the puzzle. A rise in hormone levels in the bloodstream doesn't always guarantee that the hormones are effectively interacting with muscle cells. The availability and sensitivity of hormone receptors also play a significant role in how well hormones can promote muscle growth and recovery. In a sense, when you train your muscles, you're also training your endocrine glands. The involvement of these glands depends on how much hormonal support is needed to meet the demands placed on the body during exercise. For example, if someone does wrist curls with a light weight for the 15 reps, it's unlikely that any major endocrine glands will be significantly stimulated. That's because the demand for hormones to support this exercise is minimal. The body's usual hormone levels in circulation are enough to meet the needs of such a small muscle group and effort. However, even during these light exercises, the receptors in the muscle tissue being used will still be upregulated to support the specific motor units involved. This brings us to the idea of adaptation. Just as your muscles adapt to exercise by growing stronger and larger, your endocrine system adapts to the stress of exercise. The changes can occur at various levels, such as the glands themselves, the hormones they produce, or the receptors that respond to those hormones. The potential for adaptation within the endocrine system is quite large because many different mechanisms can be influenced by exercise. There are several ways in which the endocrine system adapts the amount of hormone synthesis and storage. This refers to how much of a specific hormone the glands produce and store, ready to be released when needed during or after exercise. Hormone transport. Hormones are often carried in the blood by binding proteins. Exercise can influence how efficiently these proteins transport hormones to their target tissues. Clearance of hormones. After hormones have done their job, they need to be cleared from the body, often through the liver or other tissues. The time needed for this clearance can change with exercise training. Hormone degradation. Hormones are broken down over time. Exercise might influence how quickly or slowly this degradation occurs. Blood to tissue fluid shift. Exercise can cause shifts in fluid between the blood and tissues. This shift can affect how hormones move throughout the body and reach their target tissues. Receptor affinity. This refers to how tightly a hormone binds to its receptor. While this isn't a common adaptation from exercise training, it can happen. Stronger binding means the hormone has a more potent effect on its target cell. Receptor density. The number of receptors in a given tissue can increase with exercise, allowing the tissue to become more sensitive to hormonal signals. Size of secretory cells. In some cases, the cells that produce hormones in the glands can grow larger, enhancing their ability to produce and release hormones. Signal strength. Exercise can also affect how strongly the hormone receptor complex or secondary messengers send signals to the cell nucleus, where the action of protein synthesis is initiated. Interaction with the cell nucleus. Ultimately, it's this interaction between the hormone and the cell nucleus that dictates how much muscle protein is produced, influencing muscle growth and repair. Hormones are secreted in response to the body's need for balance, known as homeostatic control. The endocrine system helps the body stay in its optimal range of functioning. This process can be triggered by acute resistance exercise, like a single workout, or it can be altered by chronic long-term resistance training. When it comes to acute changes, those that happen immediately after a workout, hormonal concentrations may spike or drop sharply. This is the body's way of regulating a physiological variable like blood glucose levels or energy use. On the other hand, chronic adaptations occur over time with consistent training. These changes are often more subtle. For example, there might be a gradual increase or decrease in resting hormone levels that supports the body's adaptation to ongoing resistance training. In essence, when you lift weights or engage in resistance training, you're not just building muscles. Your endocrine system is constantly adapting, fine-tuning hormone production, storage, and signaling to help you recover, grow stronger, and meet the demands of your training. These adaptations are a crucial part of the body's overall strategy for becoming stronger and more resilient.